You see the screen, my screen?
Okay. We the people?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, we the people of the Great Lakes love and depend upon our waters to sustain our lives, our communities, and our life in our ecosystem. Some part of the screen is cut off because it's got the pictures of everyone, so just this side on the right-hand side is cut off.
Yeah, Paul, could you slide your screen over so it hides the left sidebar?
I'm not sure how to do it.
No, let's get this figured out.
Hide the thumbnail. Okay, that's it. All right. It is therefore with growing alarm that we confront a painful reality that despite decades of effort, the lakes are more threatened than ever. As people from across the Great Lakes, we find this unacceptable. We cannot stand by while our waters are treated as an expendable and exploitable resource when we know they're a source of life.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go to the next person. Is it visible?
Continue.
No. We'll get Kevin maybe to jump in. Can you see it?
Okay. Yes. Moved by a hope that we can yet create a thriving and life-sustaining future for our lakes, we step forward to take up our responsibility to care for and act on behalf of these waters, our Great Lakes Commons. Seeing that the health of our waters is intertwined with our own health and that of generations yet to come, we are called to assert a deeper connection and more powerful role in the future of our waters.
Gus? Ryan?
We hereby set forth the Great Lakes Commons Charter, a living document that affirms and empowers the wisdom and rightful role of the people of the lakes as stewards of our waters.
Gus?
This declaration and the first principles emerge from the collaborative work of people and communities around the lakes. Together, we reflect many walks of life, histories, and cultures. At the same time, a single purpose unites us: to transition to a mode of Great Lakes governance by which the waters and all living beings can flourish.
Toward this end, we affirm that the waters of the Great Lakes have sustained the lives of the people and communities in their basin since time immemorial, and they should continue to do so in perpetuity. Arlene, you want to go next?
Yeah. That the waters, ecosystems, and communities of the Great Lakes are entwined and interdependent. Damage to any of these causes harm to the others.
Don, you want to go?
Don?
Yep.
Sure. That the Great Lakes are a gift and a responsibility held in common by the peoples and communities of the lakes, and must be treated as such to ensure the preservation for coming generations.
That the boundaries of states, provinces, and nations crisscross the lakes but do not divide their natural integrity. All decision-making that impacts the Great Lakes must place the well-being of the bioregion and the ecosystem as a whole at the center of consideration.
That the inherent sovereignty and rights of Indigenous peoples, as codified in treaties and international agreements, must be upheld as foundational to commons governance.
Therefore, we join our voices in affirming the spirit and necessity of this declaration as the foundation for a renewed relationship and mode of governance for our Great Lakes Commons. We welcome the wisdom, standing, and power that this document will accrue over time to shape the future of our lakes. We invest it with our hopes and commitments to that future and to the future generations who will inherit the legacy of our actions.
And this last part, can we do all together in unison? So here we go. In signing this charter,
We embrace our responsibility,
individual
and collective,
to act on behalf of these
water
and of future
generations. Yay, nice work, everyone. We made it's so interesting to do this virtually over such spaces and technology, but That's the idea. I'd like to start with that. Thanks everyone for your hand in that collective reading. I did want to do a quick round of introductions. So maybe your name, where you're calling from today, or if you're part of an organization, why is this charter important to you? And maybe what it felt like reading that charter again today. So for those who don't know me, I'm Paul Baines. I'm in Toronto, in the Humber River sort of watershed, and I'm with Great Lakes Commons. Obviously, the charter is important to me because it's something that I can work towards versus work against and just be a critic of stuff. And it incorporates many of my values of native, non-native alliances, of bioregionalism, and that water is a really good connector. So I'm glad we're all here together.
I'm Kevin Hansen. I'm a filmmaker actually residing in Maryland, but we've been filming in many locations and found on a film called The Commons. And I'll send a link to it in a moment. We filmed at Notre Dame University. We've got extensive sections in the film from Jim Olson and Maud Barlow and a number of the other participants from the Notre Dame conference, and a lot of B-roll about the Great Lakes. We're going to feature it strongly. We're going to talk about the Great Lakes. We're going to talk about the Great Lakes Commons Charter as the emergence of a citizen-led dialogue and what communities are doing to reassert their, I think, essential fundamental right to their own commons. It's not owned by governments, it's owned by life and by humans as a representative of life itself, in my view. So anyway, we're going to talk about it, and I just wanted to stay with the conversation. I also just recently got a wonderful list of 10 features, 10 themes of good commons that I'm posting to the chat line right there that came from Michelle Bowens of Peer-to-Peer Foundation that I thought everybody might find value to take a look at later.
Wonderful. Nice to see you again, Kevin. It's been a little while, but good to see you.
Well, you guys have done a great work, and it's kept going, which is really cool, because these commons last for hundreds of years, and what you started here, it's going to keep rolling,
The long haul here. All right.
It's going to be here in 100 years, and people will say, wow, these folks right here, these are the ones that actually did all that.
Thank you. All right. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. My name is, hi, I'm Gus Ganley. I'm from Minneapolis. Hi. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota originally. I've been living in Western Massachusetts for the past 2 years with a theater company. So I'm part of a company called Children of the Wild, and we're preparing for a cross Great Lakes trip, a voyage next summer, where we hope to sail across the lakes. One way or another, we'll be traveling across the lakes with a show, an original opera that we're creating called The Wastelands, and we'll be going from Buffalo, New York to Duluth, Minnesota, spreading the gospel of the Great Lakes Commons the whole way. And so that's this big project. I myself, my background is in film and digital film, and so I'm the resident filmmaker in the ensemble. The rest of the ensemble are mostly actors and performers and stuff. So it's a big undertaking. Very excited to be connecting with the Great Lakes Commons, because our work as artists is very deeply connected with social and environmental justice. And to me, the Great Lakes Commons embodies that social justice and environmental justice better than really any other group that I know of, honestly, right now. And so I'm really excited to be getting to know this work and becoming a part of it. It's inspiring. This is one of my ensemble members behind me right now, Katie Burgess.
You there?
Great work.
Yeah.
Great work. Sounds fantastic.
Super happy to be meeting everybody and to be getting connected here.
And we're gonna hear some more from people. But we'll go more into depth about what Kevin and Gus and anybody else is doing. And so with the introductions, Dawn or Arlene or Ryan?
Sure, I can go. I'm originally from India. I grew up in Calcutta my baby years, and so the river that was beside us was the Hooghly River, which was a tributary from the Ganges. So Calcutta is on the water. Okay. And then my grandmother and grandfather lived on the actual Hooghly River. My grandfather worked on the boats, and we would be beside the water all the time, like constantly. And now I live in Toronto beside Lake Ontario in the Roncesvalles Sunnyside area. And so let me see, how can water, like, water is very close to me. I'm very fond of water. Like, it's very healing and it's very wonderful. And I mean, the last time was when I went, a year ago, when I went to the Water Ducks Festival. I heard about the Great Lakes, and they told me about the Great Lakes Commons, and they told me about Nestle's and how they're trying to buy the water in the Great Lakes and sell it as bottled water. And since then, I haven't bought any bottled water, and I'm boycotting Nestle. All the chocolate bars and the bread. I have 3 jobs. I work as a chef for nonprofit housing, and also as a social issue, supportive housing, and then I do landscaping. But I wear many hats. I also work in my environmental issues. I'm a secular order Franciscan, and because of that, we have a justice and peace, integrity of creation, and we're doing the environment because of Pope Francis' encyclical on the environment. And so I'm very involved with that. And other things to do with the Great Lakes, because I live here. And it's very important to have it as a common free thing. It has to be free. It can't be used for making money and other purposes. People are trying to buy it, and the Aboriginal rights and everything like that. So close to my heart.
Yeah, I thank you so much. Yeah, it is close to your heart, I could tell, Don. And thanks so much for finding us and joining us today. It's always interesting, you know, when we think about the sort of the ladder, or like, how do you get people involved, you know, and one of the reasons we wanted to open up this space is so that people like yourself who are looking at our emails or looking at our Facebook stuff, which is ironic because I'm just down the road from you in Parkdale as well, but didn't know that. But we get a chance to hang out once a month across the shorelines, and go from sort of individuals reading emails or seeing posts to becoming a conversation. So thank you again, and sharing a little bit of your connection.
I work in Parkdale. And I go to church in Parkdale.
Great. I want to talk more actually about religion and faith, but we'll get to that. Arlene or Ryan, does anybody want to say hi to the group?
Yeah, sure, I'll go. This is Arlene. I am calling in from a place we now call Guelph, but I like to consider it. I live along the banks of the Aramasa River, which is a tributary of the Speed, which flows into the Grand River. So I'm part of the Grand River watershed that empties into Lake Erie. And I also, like many of you, wear many hats. But I also work in a part-time capacity with an organization that I was involved with in its origins as well. We're called Wellington Water Watchers. And I heard you, Don, mention Nestle, that we're often in the throes of challenges with Nestle right here in our area, because we've got really fabulous ground spring water that they want. And I guess my interest in this charter is for several reasons. One is because through work with that organization, we often find ourselves, you know, having to do the pieces that are regulation pieces, you know, that are put there, I think, to make us jump through hoops. And as somebody I heard say, that environmental regulations are simply there to regulate us environmentalists, and don't really do much for like, it's a lot of hoop jumping, and in the midst of that, we're spending a lot of time trying to address the policy pieces and the kind of technical submissions that are required to have merit in that process. And the process is completely lacking the merit of the language itself and how we refer to water and how we consider it and how we quote unquote manage it. And that's why I feel really drawn to this charter. And I feel like if we could all come together to help in whatever ways in our own communities, in our own circles, help shift our language around water and how we perceive it and how we treat it and how we, quote unquote manage it, then it will just start percolating everywhere, and it'll make a really big difference, because the policy pieces that we're challenging all the time just don't have that language embedded in it. And it feels like we can jump through tons of hoops, but we're never actually going to reach our objectives unless we change the language of it. So that's yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's maybe why I'm particularly interested. I'm also interested just as a human being, it calls to me, and that's certainly my relationship with water. My partner and 2 children and I, we live a really simple off-grid living. We have no running water and no hydro, and we have a spring, one of the springs from that whole system. The reason why Nestle's is in our area, because it's beautiful, pristine groundwater, and we have it just right by our home. And so our water we collect either for our drink, when our rain barrels are frozen, that's how we get our wash water. So my daughters and I, it's pretty much our job to do that, and it is with great gratitude that we always, have the privilege of accessing our water, and we're always careful to give gratitude before we take it, and that's how it just sits in our bodies now on account of our living. And I believe that one of the reasons why the disconnection is in place is because we have water. It's really easy when you just turn the tap on, just goes somewhere, and that connection piece is missing. It's harder to feel that super connection. It's not impossible, but it's harder. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Wow. So many good themes there, Arlene. And yeah, I think, there's so many reasons why I don't like bottled water, but I think really what it comes down to is that it's really easy to lose connection to water when it's got a label on it with the address very small, and it's in plastic, and it comes from a store, and you have to exchange money for it. And so that connection issue I think is huge. So thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan, did you want to say hello, and then we'll get started to go a bit deeper?
Sure, that sounds just great. My name is Ryan Conway. I'm coming to you now from Bloomington, Indiana. I'm a political economist at the Vincent Eleanor Ostrom Workshop in Political Theory and Policy Analysis. I also am extensively involved in local community organizing around a variety of issues, but environmental activism has long been close to my heart. I'm also being recruited to our city's environmental commission to help draft a charter of the Bloomington Municipal Commons. It's an interesting project, and I have a commission meeting later on tonight to go talk more about that. But I think that our water. I'm in the Wabash River watershed. And I think that our water sources are our primary commons for all of life, clearly. And so, their defense and protection and stewarding are primary importance, because without the water, we don't have the food, we don't have the life. And so, yeah, I found out about the Great Lakes Commons Charter Project when a friend and I drove to New York for a Making Worlds conference. And Making Worlds is one of the Occupy working groups that survived and has continued organizing. I believe I met Alexa Bradley there. And so I've been following along kind of quietly in the background since. But I'm very happy to get to meet all of you people that are equally concerned. It's a nice feeling of solidarity that we can actually do this.
Great. And I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more today as well. All right. Caitlin, are you joining us, or you just want to watch in the background? I'm not quite sure. There's also a chat box, as you know, in the bottom, but we did have one more person join us. before we get started. I invited everybody, but I particularly asked a few folks to sort of, speak more directly to what they were up to. Kevin, Gus, Ryan, thank you so much for coming today. We'll see if Caitlin wants to introduce herself. If not, we'll keep going. I mean, for me, I heard a lot of themes just in the opening, and so I would love it if Kevin, Gus, and Ryan, if you spoke more about your projects, and if there was any connections to any or more of the themes that were part of our opening introduction. Things like gratitude, land as a relationship, and biography, faith, reconnecting, the role of media and all of this, and really, especially for the media makers, I suppose, changing the language in which, because we don't change the language, how can we really change the behaviors or the values? And so maybe Ryan, since you are sort of on a bit of a roll there, if you don't mind, maybe if you could say a bit more about your approach to either charters or the city work you do, or what are some of the things you'd like to sort of share to people who, for the most part, Commons is not taught in schools, it's not talked about on media, nor in coffee shops. And so maybe some ways that you feel like are useful for us to take this outside of this gathering, so we can be better equipped. We can actually increase our capacity as commoners to talk to other potential commoners.
Yeah, the linguistics issue around the commons, I feel, is like of primary importance, and it's also been very complex for me to navigate, both as like a community organizer and an academic, because many academics are often feel very threatened by community organizing, especially when it intersects with academic work. So I've received a fair amount of pressure or criticism, but I've also received a good amount of support, which has always been encouraging. I founded the Community Commons Working Group at the Ostrom Workshop in 2013, and our primary mission, I'll send you the link to our website, our primary mission was mostly to serve as a outreach and public connections node for the Ostrom Workshop, because our team and I felt that it was becoming very insular, and that was not really in the mission, visions, and values of the Ostroms themselves. And so since they had passed in 2012, a gift that we wanted to give back was to try and help preserve part of that legacy. It has since become a fairly intense political struggle inside the Ostrom Workshop, which is rather uncomfortable, but we're not going anywhere. So that's...
Ryan, one second, Ryan, before just everyone's on the same page, maybe just a sentence or two about Ostrom.
Yes, Lynn Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, and one thing that I find very illuminating about her perspective on the commons and about ways of framing commons linguistically is that the title of her Nobel speech was called, it included the title, The Commons, A World Beyond Markets and States. And so I feel that commons are... You can classify them in many ways. I mean, there are political economic definitions about what classifies as a private good versus a toll good versus a public good versus a common pool resource. And there's a lot of academic work on that. And there are some ways to render that sensible, but there are many ways in which it's very obscure. And I think Lynn herself knew this, which is why towards the end of her career, she started to get more into research related to expanding the definition of commons into things like knowledge commons and into like things like health commons, and just understanding what really the boundaries of a commons discourse could be. And I was recruited by her for the Managing the Health Commons research project, which was the first research project to study non-natural resource-based commons. And so, I was kind of on that bleeding edge of at least academically redefining the concept. And so I've tried to run with that ever since. It was actually the fall after I got back from my field work with her that the Occupy movement sprang up. And, at a dinner party a few days into it, I was making, I was making light of it and saying how, these kids don't know anything about social movement theory. And a friend was very gracious and kind enough to call me out and say, that sounds a little bit haughty of you. If you think you know so much, you should probably go down and give a lecture and teach them something. Well, I went down and I learned much more than I ever could have imagined that I could teach, because I saw on that day they were coming to a consensus process on how to make collective decision making for the park, And that instantly rendered in my mind, like they're making a commons right now. They're collectively governing and stewarding the space. This is amazing because we had a medical commons, waste management commons, food commons. And so that really inspired in me the idea that commons aren't so much about property type designations so much as they are about participation in the way that people are given space to self-organize and to steward the resources that constitute part of their identities, and that also give them life. I mean, we are part of these resources, and it's so much more. So that's kind of how the intersection between Lynn's work and activism around commoning really became part of my life and work.
And if you'd like to talk more about, you're involved with a charter process, and so I'm curious on connections between that and the Great Lakes Commons Charter, or charters, or how you see charters as a tool of commoning.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, of course, but by derivation, there's this whole concept of like the Magna Carta, and famously written by Peter Linebaugh, the Magna Carta Manifesto, describing how the Magna Carta and its sister document, written several years later, the Charter of the Forests, outlined provisions around use and stewarding of common pool resources, or what were commons of the people and what commoning behaviors kind of constituted. So that's why when I first heard about the Great Lakes Commons Charter, I felt some immediate resonance there, and I thought, okay, this could really take off. This is a really great idea. And through further conversations with other folks, including Paul, the notion of local commons charters around a number of natural land bases could be a way of starting to propagate the language around a number of municipalities across the world. And so, of course, test cases are needed, and the Great Lakes Commons Charter has, provided kind of the groundwork for my thinking on that. I am also involved with the Bloomington Food Policy Council, and we recently had endorsed by our county and the city government a Bloomington Food Policy Charter, or Bloomington Food Charter, rather. And so I feel like we have a few working examples of how charter formation and endorsement can help propagate interesting and potentially useful language around how we perceive the concept of commons and how we actualize the concept of commons in our commoning behaviors around the way we treat each other and the way we treat our land bases.
Yeah.
Well, I want to second what Ryan just said.
Say more. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, yeah. The propagation of charters, they're an extremely useful tool. People can take them, they can walk with them, they can show them, they can present them. It's a starting point, it's a strong man, it's the dialogue piece that gets the whole thing rolling. And I think what you've done with the Great Lakes is a perfect leadoff for a lot of other people to take and template it. So water being one of the easy ones to do, you see commons spring up all over the place. And frankly, I'm amazed at how possible it is, particularly when you see Europe. Europe is really way ahead of us in many ways. You look at Spain or Eastern Europe, but Russia, there are all kinds of commons out there, and almost all of them have a written statement of values, of the principle of meaning that galvanizes people, and it's used almost like, the town crier, hear ye, we hereby assert. And as crazy as it sounds, that kind of theatrics is fantastic. So Gus, when I heard about your theatrical performance across the Great Lakes, I'm like, yeah, man.
All right.
I'm not sure you're a director, too.
Sorry, Kevin, go ahead. Ryan, I wasn't sure if you wanted to say more, if you want to maybe transition over to Kevin now. Kevin, you've got seems like a real global perspective on some of this work. I'm curious on how you see Great Lakes Commons as part of that, or as just different from that, or following any of the themes Ryan suggested around commoning, or these kinds of, just the sort of. Also I want to. I'm curious about the European thing because I find there's a real lack of indigenous grounding in their thinking because of their own context, and how Arlene can probably speak to this as well. The Truro wampum belts, and looking at other forms of agreements that are either in word or in deeds or even in other formats of the various rich ways humans over time have come to agreements between nations or between peoples. And what have you seen out there, Kevin, around the diversity of agreements, be they called charters or not? Because I often find people are commenting, or commons exist, they're often hidden in plain sight. And so just like Ryan's example of the Occupy movement, people don't always call it commoning or whatever. They'll call it participation. They won't call it a commons. They'll call it an open space or whatever. And so I'm just curious on some of your perspectives on this, Kevin.
I mean, well, the word commons is a Latin or Indo-European language root. So that's where you hear that word used. But they're all over the place. I mean, the Maya, huge numbers of commons dating back hundreds and hundreds of years. The South American people, same thing. The Russian experience. I had no idea until the Heinrich Boll Foundation sponsored these two giant international conferences on the commons. But the Russians have a huge history of commoning around these villages.
What's their word? Just back to the linguistics part. What would be the translation of what? How does it?
The funny part is the rediscovery in North America. Sorry, you're stalling out at my end. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just curious, but without losing the Russian language piece or even the Mayan piece, how the word commons is translated and how the meaning shifts slightly to resonate with the culture using it.
Well, it's not too bad. I mean, I worried about that same thing, but when you talk to people, they get it. I mean, just during the making of our film, we're about 5.5 years into it. And during the beginning of the film, you really couldn't say the word without a long explanation. People didn't have any cultural references for it. But now you talk about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean, man. That's exactly what we meant. So you get this growth, this encouragement in the U.S., maybe in Canada. I think in the U.S., private property is God. So the U.S. has the most ground to recover with rediscovering what a commons really is. But it's happening. It's happening anyway. So I think you'll have less and less trouble telling people what you mean, getting the word out, and having them say, we want this too. This is cool.
Okay. All right.
And the crazy part about hidden in plain sight, like you said, it totally is. I mean, I am right now where I sit 10 miles from a 300-year-old common formed by William Penn as part of a land grant, and it's been operating. It's got 600 acres of land that was set up to feed a town. Nobody even knows about it. It's been there the whole time. It's just right there, and they're so modest about it. They don't see themselves as being anything special. They're like, oh, what our little I mean, it's called the Trustees of Newcastle Commons, and you just Google it, and there it is. Trustees of Newcastle Commons. And it's been around forever. It's like its own little government. But, people say, what are commons? They're not real. Private property is all that protects things. That's just not true. It's just not so. I love Leo Burke. He says, it's just not so.
Right. So these are the different sort of regimes of common property rights. And so land trust is an example of that.
Oh, yeah. Shared land, shared water, shared protection. I mean, they use a little bit of commercial at this Newcastle Commons I mentioned in order to protect huge acres of land and buy things to set up their own fire company. They bought land to set up their own library. I mean, they have the best fire company and library in the county because they bought the land and leased it back for $1 because that's what the community wanted.
Yeah.
So this idea that a commons is fundamental for the community to get what it wants. Okay, buy the land and on. So when you're talking about forming a Great Lake Common, I'm like, absolutely, let's get started. What's the problem? I mean, do not imagine that you're thinking too big. That's not true. You're thinking right.
But I'm curious around, so just to sort of, and I want to hear from reactions from Arlene and Don, and then I also want to obviously guess the thing, but so just this not necessarily tension, Kevin, but this who are they buying the land from, like, and the values around that, and within, I'm not sure where the nearest sort of like reserve or reservation is, but whose lands were those before contact of the Europeans and colonialism? How do you see that negotiation taking place? Because we're not going to be buying back the land around Great Lakes Commons, you know.
Yeah, Paul, my internet connection's weird. I can't hear you for a second if you can hear me.
No worries. You can always turn our video off if that, turn your video off.
No, it's my problem. My internet connection's shaky here.
Okay. But you may, to save your connection, you may want to turn your video off. I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know if you can hear me. So do you want me to pause? Others might have thoughts.
Yeah. I guess for anyone, the question would be then, yeah, how do you think about this idea of owning a commons, buying it within as a way to fight against the private property regime, but in some ways you're also reaffirming that, because without the cash you wouldn't have been able to do that, and who has not necessarily the legal authority over that land, but in some ways the historical or the sort of the ancestral authority, or even some ways the commoning authority through generations of use and ancestry and access and stewardship. How do you reconcile that idea of gratitude and relationship and contract and agreement? And I'm just really curious on some of these native, non-native collaborations, negotiations, but possibly even tensions. I'll leave it there.
I'd be happy to weigh in on some thoughts, which are truly just thoughts and questions. I don't have any solutions or answers, but we here in our area and in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and the vicinity, we are along the tributaries to the Grand, and there's this old treaty from the late 1700s called the Haldimand Tract, which granted the Haudenosaunee peoples 12 miles on either side of the Grand River, all the way from its headwaters all the way down to Lake Erie. And that was supposed to be in perpetuity, as long as the grass is green and the river flows, and that's that old expression. So, you know, here we are here, you know, there is there's a reservation to the south of us, and that's where the Haudenosaunee people, you know, call home, in that reservation. And it is by no means is it 12 miles on either side of the Grand all the way up and down. So when we're having this conversation about Nestle, and I'm glad they've CC'd me in on it in our organization, but they're bringing to attention the fact that, you know, this land that's being bought and sold and purchased and trying to get water access and water rights is actually part of their treaty rights. And, you know, why aren't they even at the table as part of the conversation? And, you know, I don't have any answers on how to proceed forward, because particularly here where I live, there are, to my knowledge, and I'm connected in with our Indigenous culture here, but there are people who don't have a lineage or a heritage from here. The people exactly that were here in this land base are no longer here, is my understanding. And so we're connecting in with people who are from First Nations backgrounds. And I'm at a loss on how to
quite well,
you know, really how to move forward. Sorry, what was that?
So I just think there was a mute issue. Sorry, maybe just the last sentence. Could you repeat, Arlene?
Sure. I just was expressing that I'm a bit at a loss on how to even navigate and step forward and feel in good conscience about, you know, any kind of choices. One of the pieces that we're trying to work on in terms of bringing some protection into the area is greenbelting the area. But I've had conversations with some of my contacts that are from First Nations backgrounds, and you know, truly the sense that I often get is, you know, like, just stop. You know, maybe, you know, there are conversations that have to happen there, and is it more about, you know, us as a settler population creating our own solutions, or is there something that we can really work on together? And I think I also really value that in this Great Lakes Commons Charter. And I believe it's there. I meant to dig around again today, but lots of those conversations around the difference between the term commons, which is, you know, of European ancestry, and where the ideology of it comes from, versus, you know, the first peoples here and their concept of the commons as for, you know, for itself, into and of itself, and just us as participants? And does that include us as settlers? And all of those questions. I'm currently feeling like those are where my questions lie in my life.
Those are.
That's all for me.
Yeah, and I think it's really important just to, even though we don't have answers, I really thank you, Arlene, for just sharing your questions. Because I think if we hear each other's questions, it could start the process of answering. And pretty soon I'll have access to a video that was recorded this weekend with a Mohawk man who teaches at Trent University here in Ontario, and named Dan Longboat. And he had a pretty good response that would help move those questions a little bit. And I'll post that to our newsletter and also our Facebook group in the coming weeks as I get access to that. But maybe before we hear from Gus, if any more threads or additions onto Arlene's thoughts, or which of them we're piggybacking on my questions and sort of Kevin's thoughts. I'll leave wide open here for a second.
I had one quick thing I wanted to throw in. I really deeply appreciate the connection, the emotional connection that so many of the participants bring to this work, the artistic, the emotional. And I have to say that the women add a critically important dimension to this whole thing, because I know I'm actually in the water. I mean, I'm a hydrogeologist by training, geophysics by training. So it's easy to talk about data, but it's hard to talk about heart. So they are so damn important. And that's why when you get a group of commoners together, like you see the occupiers going through a decision-making process, you realize there's a whole new spectrum of stuff that they're adding to the debate that has to do with what they care about. It's not easily quantifiable, but is really important to them and to many of their friends and coworkers. You realize, government's leaving that out many times. In fact, they feel stupid when they talk. Government feels stupid when they talk about emotion and heart. Why? They should be talking about emotion and heart, because when you talk about love and you talk about water in the same sentence, a government official might tune you out, but the rest of humanity is going to say, yeah, I'm with you there. I'm with you there. So I'm just saying, don't be afraid to talk about love and heart and feeling and emotion. And Gus, I'm going to come back to you and say that's exactly why I think for people to galvanize around the commoners.
Whoosh, yeah.
You just said it so elegantly. Can they use that as can we quote?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, nobody owns any thoughts. Thoughts can't be owned. Thoughts exist in the universe. So say whatever anybody else says and just say it.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Kevin, illustrates and underlines what it is that propels our company forward. How we came across the Great Lakes Commons. We do, so like I said, we're called Children of the Wild, and the crux of the work that we do centers around this practice of rewilding. And that is what we as an ensemble are enacting and working towards constantly.
Oh, I love
rewilding. And the question that we are bringing and the work that we do has to do, and rewilding is a term that, we borrowed from conservation biology. And I think it's a very exciting, there's a lot of renewed interest in this term and this practice around the world right now also. And I think there's a lot of overlap between rewilding practices and accompanying practices. They're not necessarily one and the same, but they inform each other. And the question that we're asking is, it's one thing to say, to look at what it means and looks like to rewild a habitat or to rewild an area, bioregion or something, to rewild a person, to rewild the human heart, the soul. And so it is to us a very, it's a personal question, and it's a collective question, and it's a spiritual question. And I think that theater, performance art, and filmmaking also is an arena that we inhabit. And so that's how we are asking these questions and working them out.
Hey, Paul, dude, organize a flotilla of boats to sail down the Great Lakes along with Gus and his troop, and they lead off the event with the proclamation of the charter, the Great Lakes Charter, and everybody else lands in a circle, and you begin the occupation of the shoreline at every city along the Great Lakes.
There you go. Let's make that happen. I mean, that's really not far off from what we are wanting to do and imagining and planning for right now.
Well, tell us what your plans are so far, Gus.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I can tell you, I'm in Buffalo right now. I'm in Buffalo, New York, in a hostel at the moment, and I'll be in Cleveland in tomorrow. So we're going from Buffalo to Cleveland, Detroit, Mackinac City, through Lake Superior, and ending in Duluth. So that's going to be the stretch of lakes that we're covering this coming June. We'll be sailing the lakes and bringing the charter everywhere we go. So we're working with different groups in every place that we're in, and the show that we do, we tailor and adapt to the location. So we're in a process of we've found and are finding these locations that we're performing in. But it's about bringing the audience to the water and creating an experience. We did this in Massachusetts. We've been in residence. We were doing this all the summer and fall. And so we did a show. I told Paul about this. We did this show called The Pipeline Processions, because the big threat in Western Massachusetts at the moment, environmentally, centers around a gas pipeline, a frack gas pipeline that is being proposed. And there's a lot of communities resisting that. And so we were bringing audiences to these different sites, conservation areas, homes, retreats, churches that were in the direct line of the pipeline, where the pipeline would go. And so we go to that spot and we see it and we see what's at stake, and we build performance around it. We build with music and with story and performance and testimony. And so we also, as part of our theater and part of our work, we hear the testimony of the people whose land we're on, or who calls it home, depending on where we are. And to build these emotional connections with people so that it's not an abstract environmental issue. It's reality as tangible as it can be, and it's somebody that you know in their backyard, and so you hear from them, you hear what their story is, and you see it, and in so doing, our mission is to be galvanizing people in this way to create these emotional bonds that I think are necessary for the activism to happen, and then we can. And so we were also using them as ways to raise money for a legal defense. The Pipeline Awareness Network does legal defense. So it's a fundraiser in that sense, but it's more importantly, I think it's creating the investment, the emotional long-term investment that's needed for us to reconnect with the lakes. And so in the case of the Great Lakes, we want to do something very similar, bring people to the lakes, see and it's a different issue in each place. In Detroit, there are pipelines that they're fighting. In Mackinac, there's the Line 5 pipeline that they're fighting. In Buffalo, there's a lot of sewage that is being dumped directly into the creeks that's flowing into the lakes. And it's about bringing people to these places, seeing it firsthand. This is where the pipeline would be. This is where the sewage is being dumped, and so that, yeah.
On that note, Gus, I'm just curious on any more thoughts on how you facilitate that conversation around people's relationship with the land. I know you were already starting that in some ways, but either based on the pipeline processions or your other work or you're thinking about next summer, how do we foster and facilitate as educators, as citizens, as commoners, as artists, as media makers, because we rarely speak about our identity as it ties to the land. We will talk about many other aspects of our identities, and at most we'll say the town or where we're from. But any ideas on, or anyone can jump in after Gus, but on ways we can support that in terms of, again, looking at our relationship with land and thus water as well?
That's awesome. Great question. I mean, partly we're doing that with immediately after the show. We do conversations. We have facilitated conversations, and so the show is an hour. We have this experience together, and we hear these stories, and then we come together and we have not just a talk back, not just like people ask us questions or something, but a facilitated conversation where we can we have somebody moderating. And so that we are actively encouraging dialogue. So that's important. But I think what you're getting at and what we need to figure out is how we can make sure that these experiences don't just wash away, like so that like it's a soil, so that the topsoil doesn't just wash away and go into the ocean, and so that we don't get it back, but that we can retain it. Like what do we have? And this is a good question.
Roots.
How are we building these roots? What can we put in, what can we plant so that these stories can stick around, And I think, there's a lot of ways that we can start to address this question. And I think like you're already doing that with the Great Lakes map, with the map, and like these online platforms are important places. The more that we can have homes and places where people can go, and I video all of our performances and create pieces out of them. But I think, like, for example, then they could go online, right? And I think we can all be doing that with all of our events. We can be having these events, creating these experiences, finding places where they can live online, for instance, but not stopping there, but just hopefully starting there so that we can have these things and have them accumulate, like bioaccumulation is a big problem, but I think we can think of a reverse, like positive equivalent. How can we accumulate these very positive, we're kicking up a lot of different kinds of nutrients. And so how can we allow those to accumulate up and stick around? So that it's not just like, oh, I did that. I went to that show, or I went to a nice talk or a nice film screening, last month, and then there's no connection in my life, but people are keeping the stories alive, the conversation alive. That's a good question. I'm interested in figuring out how to do it. I'm curious. That is a question. I am so, and that's a huge reason why I'm so excited to be in this conversation and talking with you all, because that's what I'm asking too. How can we keep this stuff staying around? How can we support each other in all of our activities, and what platforms can we create? And I think the charter is a good tool. I agree. I do believe that the charter is a great tool. We do these shows and we want to pass the charter out. We want people to sign up. And I think that can be a gateway for people. It's a door. We open a door for people. A lot of people have not heard of the Great Lakes Commons yet. People that I talk to have never heard of the Great Lakes Commons yet. And the charter is the perfect invitation for it. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree. Something that keep this website going. I'm sorry?
No, I just wanted to add, Gus, that what you're talking about sounds a lot to me like the creation of an infrastructure for the commons. And that's something that good commoners build. They build infrastructure, that solid, long-term, stable stuff. So, Paul, your map is huge. Mm-hmm. That thing has to last 100 years. Okay, we need to record all this stuff so that the stories are not lost. So the elders' words are listenable and viewable 500 years from now. Those elders' words are still ringing in the ears of the children. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, if Gus's shows lead to people signing up, joining not only a list, but building their own local infrastructure, where they say, okay, we're going to commit to, and it is every year we're going to have XYZ happen, and we're going to form a council, and the council is going to meet. That's a thing that comes out of. So it's not a one-off event. It's a durable, reproducible. Every single year we get together and we're working on the Great Lakes together.
When did the Great Lakes Common Charter start? Like, when did it start?
Yeah, and so it didn't just happen overnight. It's a good question, Don. And so because I met people like Kevin like 3 years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago. And so soon after that, we started working collaboratively. And so I'd be curious on your thoughts around this, Ryan. We started working collaboratively for 2 years from various people across in the Great Lakes commons community. And so we had meetings like this every couple of weeks, and we talked about, themes, patterns, language, examples and intentions, and this combination of something that's invitational, aspirational, and also recognizing what has come before in terms of existing agreements between nations, but also recognizing what's not working. And so trying to channel all of that a little bit, and over a 2-year period, the Great Lakes Commons Charter was written. And that we finished it a year last June, and we had an event, one like this, where we had like 100 people, signed in and presenting this charter, and that's when we started collecting. I mean, we're not really just collecting names. I feel like sometimes people use the language like, sign the charter and how you sign a petition, but really we're only petitioning ourselves. We're just sort of adding our name to it. And so it's this combination of wanting to get lots of people to support it, but not necessarily that's it. That's almost like the beginning rather than the end. And, but yeah, so a year last June, to answer your question, with a 2-year collaborative process before that. To answer your question?
Yeah, so the video is cutting off in and out. You're like, I can't hear you that well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. My internet maybe isn't the greatest either. I hope
Well, you said about collaboration for 2 years, and then about a year and a half ago, you got the Charter Challenge started, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you got people to sign up.
Exactly.
So I belong to an organization called the Dream Team, and we've been around for 15 years. And we are in challenge with the Charter Challenge of the Human Rights about Chapter 7, about safe liberty and life and space. And we're in a Charter Challenge for the rights to housing, to get housing as a human right. And we are with a number of organizations. Tomorrow is Rights to Housing Day. It's a different topic, but I'm just saying on about doing things, how you could, not copy, but piggyback or learn from our experience.
Yeah.
And so what we do to get stories to stay and have seeds planted and grow and have roots is we do presentations like in high schools and universities and community groups and different groups. We take politicians to court, governments to court. We are in the Supreme Court of Canada right now for rights to housing, to have human rights as a housing right. Because before, in the Human Rights Code, gender identity and gender equality was not there. And just recently, because of all the backlash happening about LGBTQ and so on, they put gender identity in the human rights. So we'd like to put housing as a human right in the charter, in the Human Rights Code. And so we have members of the Dream Team. At the moment, we have 20 members, and we do presentations throughout the whole of Ontario, mainly Toronto. But people tell their story, their gloom and doom story about mental health and supportive housing and housing. And then they tell the happy ending of how they've got supportive housing or how their lives have become better. And this is like sort of piggybacking on what one of the speakers, one of the talkers just said, is how we have grown and how people know the Dream Team. Like we have a website, we have, gala 15th anniversary, and Now we have the Bill of Rights for supportive housing tenants, and we went to Ottawa and promoted it, and we've gone through different cities in Canada, not Canada, Ontario. And so just maybe some ideas to throw in.
I mean, thank you so much, Don. There's so many similarities around housing and water that I could, think about. One of them is this idea. On the one hand, there's this idea, and maybe Ryan, this maybe part of your territory. This idea of like you can have the political right to something, but how does that actually get lived, right? And the idea that where do rights come from? Do we petition governments to give us rights? Or do we use sort of, what we would consider universal rights to hold governments accountable and to use it as a gauge or as a strategy to get action done? Because as we know, you can just because you have the right to something like clean water doesn't mean you actually have it. And so in some ways, what you're also doing, what I hear, Don, is this idea of reclaiming power or reclaiming sort of like where does the agency come from? Because we can't just petition or sue people there all the time. We need other strategies. And I do know that in Parkdale, there is a land trust sort of a movement started as well as a way to take some control or to provide not a either or not to say that the other strategies aren't important, but they are a commoning way of saying, well, how can we develop alternatives that don't depend on governments giving us things? And I guess I'm just open. For me, it raises the question around where do rights come from? In what ways do our actions create capacity versus create a division between our governments and us and the walls that separate us? And that while we need to have rights to things, they alone are not the end of the conversation. Just they're almost like the start of it. So a lot of parallel, I think, to water as well.
Paul, if I may, well, just bounce off. I remember being in this meeting in Milwaukee in May. There was a gathering, a Great Lakes Commons gathering, and there was this talk about the rights-based thinking and action, and that framework. And somebody had, I can't remember who brought this up, but there is a really cool and I think complementary tension or conflict around a Western conception of rights-based activism or organizing and something of an indigenous, at least North American indigenous conception of responsibility. And that was one of the conversations that we had that I walked away from that with a little bit of clarity about thinking of it and that shift in thinking about not so much demanding rights that are granted by the state or so forth, but by declaring a responsibility to act together to preserve these common resources. So it's a responsibility for us to own that we need to self-govern. We need to do what we need to do to take care of these things that are clearly dying or falling to the wayside. And so I just appreciated that shift towards that.
Yeah, but then lots of hand waving. Arlene, I know you're on the phone, but through the video technology here, we're seeing lots of people wiggle their fingers, which I think from the Occupy movement and other demos is a nonverbal way of throwing in your support for that idea as a way to check the temperature of the idea in the larger conversation. And just to sort of, I'd love to hear reactions to Gus's thing, but how do you foster responsibility, not in a sort of guilting sort of like people are already busy and thus who has the time and the resources to enact that responsibility? So how do we balance responsibility with equity and with actually holding governments and corporations accountable? Because I think the sort of extreme of the responsibility conversation is about, well, it's all about my individual choices. I'm as guilty as the next person, without necessarily saying, well, no, Nestle is using its big dollars to threaten people and to sort of whatever. Our governments are not doing what they said they're supposed to have been doing. And so again, that there's shared responsibility with equity, but also accountability for those who do get our vote or get our money or occupy our lands. And so I've talked too much, but I always love stuff like this. Responsibility.
I mean, I don't want to speak too much, but I do want to just to quickly respond. I do think that to me, it reminds me of the argument for or against really pacifism, which is that there is a responsibility to defend yourself and defend your community, which is, I think a good question or debate. But if you take this position of needing to defend your community, then I think that there isn't much contradiction in taking this perspective of responsibility and having that be harmonious with holding these corporations or governments or whomever accountable, because it's about your communities or your town or your bioregion or however defined. It's about your ability to survive, and so we need to do what's necessary. And sometimes what's necessary is to hold Nestle accountable or whatever. Yeah, that's it.
Hey, I'll just note, in listening to a lot of commenters talking about existing and hoped for future commons, it became clear that I was worrying way too much about the details. The basics of the commons are straight on, easy, and good. They don't need. I don't even need to debate them anymore. The missing piece for most commoners is power. Okay, commoners need to have power. Now, the safest way to use power is in a group, and the consensus model offers a nice exercise of group power. So I would say that I want to be very careful about this conversation because power has been so corrupted and corrupting in the past. It has to be done carefully now. But I will say that the good long-lasting commons acquire power primarily through donations of land, and the income from land is very durable and long-lasting. So that I would suggest that the Great Lakes Commons ought to form a trust chartered in both Canada and the US, and that it ought to be a legal entity in both places, and we ought to ask people to start giving their land to that trust and begin thinking about long-term income generation, because we'll need lawyers, we will need long-term media, we will need good stewardship that comes with being stewards of that land, and we simply start talking about it like we are here forever, because that's what we're talking about. We're going to be here forever as a community of supporting. So because I don't physically reside in the Great Lakes Basin, this is one of the challenges of how you interact outside and solicit support from people outside who want to help. Well, if someone gave you 5,000 acres of land in Montana and you wanted to use that as a leverage to buy land in the Great Lakes Basin, I'd say do it. Set up the entity, talk to Alexa Bradley, talk to Jim Olson to set up the corporation, talk to Maud Barlow, set up the Commonwealth Corporation, whatever's necessary, and let's go forward.
Great ideas, Kevin. I'm mindful of time. We've got about 15 minutes left. I've spoken a lot. I did want to make sure we had a chance not only to hear from everybody, but also to open up the invitation of ways in which this group of people can support each other. What kind of needs or offers are you open to today? What sort of needs do you have from Great Lakes Commons as an organization to help plant these seeds? And so I did want to create a little bit of an economy of needs and offers before we left, between everybody here and between people here and GLC. But we've still got 15 more minutes, and I don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation as it stood beforehand, looking at responsibilities. Or I know another thread we had in the opening was looking at religion and faith and healing and gratitude. So just to keep the flow going a little bit as well.
First of all, I think you need to have the word spread out, the word known, not just in social justice websites but it should be like amongst your family and your friends and your contact list who in your Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these, and spread the word about Great Lakes Commons. Because the key to a successful thing is advertisement. Any event, any word, you need to have advertisement.
I guess bottled water is a good example that, you can create a new need with enough advertising.
It's more, and tell everyone's about the Great Lakes Common Charter and what's happening in the Great Lakes, and spread the word out. That's the key thing you need to know, is to let everyone know, because you say Great Lakes Common. What's that? Who's that? When did they start? We never heard about these people. So spread the word out. Let everybody know. Advertise. Like, you know how they have the billboards in the subways? Do that.
Yep.
That's one little thing I think that would progress everything.
Yeah.
You know.
Other ideas from folks on what they feel they need to continue their work as a Great Lakes commoner, or what they may be able to offer, or making connections between people of the shorelines and also with Great Lakes Commons as an organization. Suggestions, offers, questions, concerns, examples.
I mean, I think connecting this particular project with recasting other watersheds as commons, and seeing if a broader network of people who are viewing water in general, especially in their watersheds, as commons, would be helpful for two reasons. One, because it provides people with a way of getting in touch, with the felt experience of relationship with water wherever they are, which means that they can also be in touch with you wherever you are. Well, we know where the Great Lakes are. But beyond that, interpersonal connection and that solidarity building, it's also fortuitous that Eleanor Ostrom's graduate work, her doctoral thesis, was on water basins around Los Angeles. And so that actually was the genesis for her of understanding water basins as commons, and that kind of launched some of her work into commons theory. So you can make academic ties, and you can make interpersonal ties. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to make greater inroads. I've got to analyze our mailing list to look at college and university contacts, because looking at our funding next year, it'd be great to have some institutional support, which, as you may know, Ryan, has its edges or its problems as well. But if there was a school of governance or re-indigenization or environment or bioregionalism or water that was studying these things academically, which could provide institutional support for Great Lakes Commons, that would also help with the sort of improving not only the communications, but improving the sort of all the various outreach, sort of social movement, sort of legal, sort of reclaiming discussions we've had, but in much more depth.
Well, I'd be happy to try and get you and anyone from your crew onto the doc for a colloquium at the Ostrom workshop. And I don't know how amenable the new director would be to institutional support, but clearly the Ostrom workshop makes the most sense, because there are so many. It's an interdisciplinary hub for just this kind of work. But I'll see what I can do.
Thank you. We had a chat message from Caitlin, who is just listening in. I'm working with Caitlin on a map, actually, of the Great Lakes Commons in relationship to bottled water. And she's saying it's just an American Water Resources Association annual conference, and it would have been great for GLC to have a presence there. So yeah, and I was at one, and I've been to a couple, I've been to many, but yeah, it's a real bit of a circuit. And yeah, for me, the challenge is always knowing when the call is made, you got to be on the right lists or whatever. And so please let us know if the academics or more people in the school system right now. If there are upcoming call for papers or presenters, let us know at GLC, because we likely aren't viewing those lists the same way you are. So I like presenting, not necessarily at very academic settings, but definitely in ones that are talking about big ideas and talking about transformative social movements and talking about water. Obviously, these fit and governance. These fit us very well. Yeah. I mean, I think this idea of the economy is in my mind at least,
I mean, another
between wants and needs of this group and GLC is, the idea that commoners need each other. It's again this gap between the idealism of like everything should be rewilded or re-indigenized or collective decision making and shared leadership and sustainable funding and all the rest. But you need to create. It's almost like a commons could also be defined. I'm just thinking of this now as like interdependencies, right? Like we need people needing other people, not only for survival, but also for well-being and for a sense of place. And so I really want to stress that, how we can think about what we need and how we can connect with people's needs, because most people, they don't necessarily need a commons every day. They want to they'd love to have it to fall back on, but how can we sort of put it more in the everyday? And so that's why we're working on campaigns like the bottled water, and which the map could be useful for. We're trying to make connections around Indigenous solidarity work, around treaty rights, or around drinking water advisories, which are mostly First Nations communities. Because unless you're relevant to those needs, you're just a piece of paper, you're just a website, you're just an idea. And so I find we want to make sure we have a vision and a story, but one that is being told not out of altruism and idealism, but also told out of need, out of interdependency.
I would say mutual aid is the way of thinking about it. That we are our needs are intertwined, and so we are each helping each other and helping ourselves. And I mean on that, I have an offer that is also a need moving forward from this conversation, which is that there are a lot of places. So when I'm in Detroit and then Mackinac and then Duluth later this month, I'm connecting already with a lot of people who are fighting various, mostly Enbridge pipelines, but various pipelines. And that's a big battle happening right now all over this continent, and certainly along these Great Lakes and in these places. And, as in Mackinac, the Line 5 pipeline, there's a solid Great Lakes Commons presence there. However, in Detroit and in Duluth, there seems to be, as far as I know, not a very big Great Lakes Commons presence in those fights. And I think there should be. And because it's like 350.org and Honor the Earth in Minnesota, and these really, really awesome people. And there's like the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands, Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands, working in Detroit. And I would love to be at service in the Great Lakes Commons and connecting the Commons language, but the Commons, you all people, and the Commons people, and this Commons, Great Lakes Commons infrastructure, to be plugging that into these battles underway. And so that's my offer and my need. My need is like, what can I do now? I'm going to be meeting with people next week in Detroit and the week after that in Minnesota. And so that's an open question. What can I do to help in a concrete way bring the Great Lakes Commons presently into these fights happening?
Yeah.
Who do you know in these places? What connections can be made beyond just talking about the Commons, beyond just giving them the charter, which I'll already be doing. But so that's question.
And I think that's what it takes. It almost takes like people like yourself, Gus, to sort of go out there. And if, while we need to do our work locally on things that matter and where we call home, if we do have the gift of being mobile, used that to connect issues, movements, groups, because it is really easy to sort of only know what's happening locally. And I think until you sort of get out there and talk to people, you can sort of see the diversity of issues, the diversity of groups, diversity of tactics. And so I'm really happy you're going out there, because I know there's no other real way of doing it beyond literally being on the road. And I'm happy you'll be speaking about Great Lakes Commons. I mean, I think sometimes, I've those days where you're like, oh, I've had more, writing guest blogs for other websites rather than just our own website, or having more of that dialogue. I think this is a dialogue as well, which we could have. I've been thinking about in the new year. So here's a pitch. What do we think about this? So this is our fifth one is going to be in December, of these charter campfires. In the new year, I think if we were to continue them, maybe they could be a bit more thematic to them. And so one of them could be about pipelines, and it would also be a bit more of an active invite versus a passive invite. And so, or another theme could be charters or arts and engagement. I mean, I don't want to be sloppy with the categories, because I think it's really important. Or maybe it's more like questions, strategic questions that we focus the discussion around, because I think I'd love to have those discussions of how a charter could advance and support a pipeline fight, as one example.
Well, I think another thing too to consider, it was brought up in after Gus's response about distinguishing rights and responsibilities. I would also offer that rights and responsibilities are at root just principles for relation and how to relate to people and other things. And just like any other rule or norm or other institutional structure, I mean, it's just about stabilizing the expectations between independent actors. And so when we look at these discourses, it's tempting to get bogged down in their historical roots and languages and how they've emerged and evolved. What I'm actually getting to is something very concrete, because the reaction was, so how do we engage people that have limited time and that have responsibilities to their families, their neighbors, their workplaces, and other things? How do we engage them in a language of responsibility to something as stewarding something like the Great Lakes or their watersheds? And I think and you can touch on that in some ways, because responsibility can be framed around love and how someone personally interacts with this water source and these water sources. And so I'm inspiring people and helping put people in touch with their actual relationship with how they respond to and interact with these water sources is a way of cultivating responsibility by affection. But another way of empowering commoners to understand relations among themselves more and understand their relations with other things more is by also helping to network with and supporting a commons-based projects. And among those, I would list things like tool libraries, community tool libraries, time banking. I don't know how much any of you know about time banking. I would highly recommend looking into it. Time banking is a great way of building relationships and meeting each other's needs without having to resort to a money economy. And it's through things like time banking, even community-supported agriculture shares, and through tool libraries and community seed library networks. These are the ways in which we can help people meet their needs and build relationships outside of the money economy. And it's for people that have great wealth or no wealth. And so those are the people, when you make time, when you help those people meet their needs that way, then they will have time and they will have the realizations of their relationships with each other and the relationship with their land base, that they will have time and the motivation to invest.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
Very helpful.
I thought I spoke fast. Yeah. I think, Brian, what I hear there is, there is this multifaceted approach, because you really, at the crux of this is that the consumer capitalism keeps us all distracted and busy so that we can't be good commoners. But there are a growing number of, an umbrella term of whatever, collaborative consumption projects that are aiming to sort of get us a little bit of sovereignty from the market and reclaim our time, which is in some ways the greatest resource, so that we can do the commoning. And you mentioned a host of examples there, or projects that I think also Great Lakes Commons needs to do a better job of connecting with, because in some ways they're working on they're working in the same modality, same philosophy, just with a different scale or whatever. And so, talked about housing folks, we talked a little bit about religion. We'll get to that next time. That could be a whole theme in the new year, talking about faith, spirit, and water. I think we'll bring Kathy on that one, I guess. And
a couple of things to say, I think.
Yeah, and so these themes are strong, and I think outreach to these collaborative consumption groups, I think, is key as well. Gus, you wanted to jump in?
No, I really don't know what I can add at this point.
Okay. Well, it is 4:30. I want to respect everyone's time and commitment. It's great when time goes by quickly. I'll leave the last word. Anybody who wants to have the last word here?
Oh, I just want to say that water is a privilege because it's not something that we can use easily. Because in Africa, look how difficult water is there. People rarely have water. In Europe, because I saw this display in the ROM quite a few years ago about how in Africa, people might use 50 milligrams of water a day, and in Europe, they use 150, whereas in North America, it's 1,500 a day. So water is a privilege. It's like a car. A car is a privilege. Water is a privilege. So we could let that message be known in Canada, North America, and the Great Lakes Commons. That is a privilege. Not everybody has the Great Lakes. And everywhere where water is in the world is a privilege. And it's going to be going away, like either the world for the future, we're all going to be drowned in water, or it's going to be gone. So water is like a special commodity.
I think, Don, you bring up a good point, and I think, because I think what happens is people in the Great Lakes, for instance, because we're surrounded by water, they feel like it's not important because we have so much of it. But for me, what that says is because we have so much of it, then thus we have a greater responsibility, because it's not really commons in the sense of the bioregion. That's not ours. The commons doesn't end at the watershed boundary. The Great Lakes belong to the world. And so if you think about, because we have all of this water in our backyards, we have a greater, we should steal a greater call because of that
responsibility.
Yeah. So thanks for helping us. Because I don't want to get stuck into, I know Kevin was feeling a bit shameful maybe for not, or not shameful, but he was feeling left out in some ways that he couldn't participate because he doesn't live in the bioregion. But again, the Great Lakes really belong to the world. And so we can all feel as if we have a role to play. And for those of us who depend on these waters for our drinking water, so I do, Kevin does not. So I have a responsibility to help Kevin's, whatever, I'm rambling on. But anyways.
No. Listen, Paul.
Oh, there you are.
You've done a hero's work setting up this kind of thing. So I really appreciate that. And I want to say thank you to all of you for setting it up. I do want to get very much more specific, however. I'm looking at the projects in the pipeline, and I think Gus's is closest to launching and most specific and could benefit from all of us lending our support. And I'm wondering how to do that, what the tour looks like in your mind, Gus. We've envisioned a film tour in mid-2016 for our film. I would love to show our Commons film the night after you land, so that people could get an additional viewpoint. And at the same time, we bring in somebody that shows how to form a maker space. And then we get together all the CSA. In other words, we bring together the commoners that are there with a focal point like your event, which is why I like your event so much. And I'm going to make the request. Gus, will you pass around as much as you can share or a link to what you know so that we can then cogitate on that and others can be informed, and perhaps we can send that out to our other people.
I would love to, and I wonder how to do that. Do I send that to, I don't know if I have everybody's email addresses. Do I send that to the Great Lakes Commons to Paul? And Paul, will you send that to everybody, or is there a list here? Because I think that would be great, and I would love to do exactly that.
Yeah, so I have everyone's emails. I can share them, and I'm going to write a blog post about today's conversation. of some of the key things that I got out of it. You could always add your comments to that blog post. This is also being recorded, which we will share with the community as for those who couldn't join us as a document. And so use me as an in-between for these conversations as an example between Kevin and Gus. And this is just the beginning. And so there's lots more to come. And, you know, one of the themes in January could be on the specifics you speak about, Kevin, in terms of like, okay, what is this route? What are the engagement spots? What are we doing here? What are we doing there? So one of these monthly gatherings could be on that specific question or project, and as we sort of try to focus more in the new year.
Yeah, Paul, since I think you have access to the most connectivity amongst this group, that perhaps some way in which you could clone yourself or make available some of that now. In other words, it right now is something of a one-directional pipeline away from the Commons map storage towards the viewership. If there's some way that the viewers could in turn reconnect with the others who have shared, so that there's a two-directional connectivity amongst the map project people, that to me is a technological thing that you could be tremendously powerful with.
Just so I'm clear though, beyond the blog post or people having my email or the website's email and the map, is there something you're suggesting to facilitate that sort of like that mutual aid part?
Yes, so that Gus could communicate with everybody on your list. And so that Gus could communicate with everybody on my list.
Yes,
I mean, I've got 6,000 people on my list that I want to share with this kind of project. And I've been looking for, I mean, as our film launches, I want to say, go see Gus's show, because at it, you'll learn not only what he has to say, but X, Y, Z. And that physical presence on the Great Lakes builds others to learn about it.
Got it. And
I'm laying a lot on you because you've got the resources.
Yeah, and anyone here is welcome to write a blog post for us, or I can cross post on your websites as well. And I think, Kevin, your idea of mailing lists is key. And so let's forward these things and include each other's cross communication. We're already right here. Well, we don't need to talk about pipelines and tool libraries. We've already got enough in some ways to start with right here. To start with. Okay, I do want to respect the time. So please, I will share emails. I will share this video and do a blog post. Let's continue parts of this, and we will have another one of these in December with more focused ones in the new year. Gus, I'll see you in Cleveland on Saturday, and I'll see the rest. Maybe Don, I'll see you in Parkdale by the water. Now I know what you look like. That's great. Please, everyone, keep in touch. And I really appreciate of your time and all of your ideas, questions, emotions today. It's really important. I think we all agree on that. And way back when we read that charter together, just felt like, again, going from an individual to part of a community. So I thank you one more time.
Thank you all, and thank you, Paul.
Thank you all. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.